I'm really excited to be here talking about the Forever Green project, which has a long and storied history about transforming agriculture in the American Midwest. And ProSocial has been involved in this project for about 4 or 5 years. I'm guessing, Nick, is that about right? And so it's been our privilege to be involved in this project and to really uh, dive into, I mean, if anything is the cultural evolution of a complex system, this would be it. How do you take current American agriculture in the Midwest and transform it into something completely different? That's a hard problem. You might say a wicked problem that we've been confronted with some success. And so this is a conversational podcast. So Nick and Whitney are not going to give a presentation. Instead, as Nick put it, there's going to be an elevator speech, but it's a very long building. And so take it away. Please introduce yourself, Nick and Whitney. Please introduce yourselves, plus this project, and then we'll leave plenty of time for audience participation. But take it away, please.
Thanks a lot, David, and hello, everyone. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to have a chance to talk about the Forever Green Project to this particular group. And so I will briefly introduce myself and Whitney Clark, and then proceed with the elevator speech from floor one. And however, to introduce myself, I am a faculty member at the University of Minnesota in our College of Agriculture. My academic interest is in the field of agroecology, which is essentially uh, a, a discipline that considers agriculture holistically, understanding both its biophysical and its sociocultural elements as forming systems and understanding those systems as being what we need to work on if we hope to make agriculture better. I'm specifically interested in how we can find pathways to diversification into agriculture. And that's what the Forever Green Project is all about. Whitney Clark is executive director of a very important partner organization and collaborator from some time ago in the Forever Green Project called the Friends of the Mississippi River. And I'll let Whitney say a bit more about that organization when he shares his perspective in just a bit. But to get into the elevator speech, the agriculture of the Midwest of North America is globally very important to the food system of the world. It is the location of some of the best soils that remain on the planet. And it is very important to us to take good care of those soils and all of the other resources of water, of biodiversity, of climate, and of community that are necessary to that agriculture. So one of the uh, fundamental challenges that we have in Midwest agriculture is the need to take better care of soil by having living plants occupying this globally precious soil more than they do right now. Soil is the result of the ongoing partnership between plants and microorganisms. That partnership cannot occur if there's not a living plant root in the soil. So extending the amount of time and the amount of our farm landscapes that are covered by living plants to as much of the annual cycle as possible is a really critical challenge and imperative for the agriculture that we have in the Midwest. And the Forever Green Project is all about trying to extend those living roots in the soil as broadly as we can in time and in space. And we refer to that concept of agriculture as continuous living cover agriculture. So there's a living plant roots in the soil for as much of the annual cycle over as much of the farm landscape as possible. So that continuous living cover agriculture is what the Forever Green Project is trying to advance. So how so? You are now asking. The um, the premise of Forever Green is that we do not have a sufficient portfolio of crops that can be grown commercially on this globally precious soil to enable continuous living cover to expand to the scale that we need it, which is over tens of millions of acres in the Midwest. So, from that premise that we don't have enough crops follows our basic project in Forever Green, which is developing a larger portfolio of crops that produce things that society needs and wants, and which extend continuous living cover agriculture over the tens of millions of acres that we needed to be operating. So let's think a little bit about what it means to develop a new crop. It is very difficult to introduce a new crop into commercial agriculture. And this is because um, a entire sort of system has to be built in addition to the challenges of uh, developing the crop by crop breeding. So what I mean by the system is, let's just take the idea that you have a new crop that grows in the fall and the spring and survives the winter, and therefore extends continuous living cover in that way. That new crop has to be, first of all, it has to have good traits to be a legitimate crop. It has to germinate well. It has to be efficiently harvestable, and so on. It has to produce adequate yields. But beyond that, you have to figure out how to grow the crop in a crop rotation where other crops are being grown, and the crop you're adding can't interfere too much with the other crops. You may have to devise new equipment to harvest and store and process the crop. You may need new expensive infrastructure, such as, say, um, industrial scale crushing plants that are needed to process um, many of the crops that we grow in the Midwest. You will need supportive policy involving things like insurance available to farmers and other kinds of subsidies because all commercial crops in the US are substantially subsidized by policy. And of course, you will need a market for these crops. So the point is that there is this entire system of many elements that has to be built around a new crop. And the purpose and the sort of fundamental project of Forever Green is not to develop the crops, but to develop the crops and the entire system that needs to be built around them. There are many cultural elements in what broadly can be seen as cultural elements in that quote unquote new system to support a crop. So the interest of the group that's gathered here in conscious cultural evolution is very much relevant to the Forever Green project. And I'll just say a little bit more that developing these systems around these crops requires sustained cooperation across fundamental and different sectors of society, such as the academic and knowledge production sector. including but not limited to university researchers, also definitely including practicing farmers. The private sector is important. The finance sector is critical. The advocacy sector is crucial to work on the policy innovations and changes that are needed. And media and are critical to the kind of new narratives that we believe are essential to help sustain cooperation. So the point is that it takes a long time to build these new systems around these crops. It also takes a while to actually breed the crops genetically. It takes sustained cooperation across sectors. In many cases, these sectors are not at all used to cooperating with each other. And all of the challenges, all the social dilemmas and other well-known challenges of sustained cooperation at scale um, present themselves to Forever Green. And we worked hard to manage these and have made some progress, but we can get into that a little later on. So that's my the as threatened really long elevator speech, and I would like now to pass the talking stick to my friend and colleague Whitney Clark.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
We are a river conservation organization based in the Twin Cities, and uh, we, uh, for a long time, have been aware that the predominant source of pollutants to the Mississippi River, and not just the Mississippi River, but all of our surface and groundwater in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, is agriculture. Um, and uh, for a long time, we looked at that challenge as one that was too large for a small nonprofit to really effectively take on. You have to pick your battles, and choosing one of the biggest and most challenging and wicked problems to try to solve did not seem like a strategic approach to us. Um, and so we worked on other more measured objectives, like trying to address urban stormwater challenges to the Mississippi and to local water bodies. But as we matured as an organization, we became very frustrated with the progress of you know, our governing agencies, agricultural institutions, all of whom acknowledge the role that agriculture was playing, not only in the degradation of our waters, but also agriculture is one of the top two climate gas emitting sectors. Um, and so we get a lot of things from agriculture, but we're not getting everything we need. And we looked at the tools that were being employed by our state and federal and local agencies to try to address this problem. Everybody acknowledged the problem. Everybody um, knows where this pollution is coming from. Um, and we attempted to, and we have been attempting to address it through a range of tools and practices, and I think most people will be familiar with them. One is voluntary best management practices that we try to cajole or incentivize producers to employ, things like more careful and precision nutrient management, installing drainage, conservation drainage infrastructure, using cover crops. Another important tool has been setting aside especially marginal land in our agricultural landscape and putting it in grass, not trying to produce crops on it. And these tools, they are effective in as far as they are employed, but they are very expensive, and they can't, we discovered that we can't get to clean water. We can't reach our agricultural pollution reduction goals simply by relying on them, not within a realistic um, range of cost expenditures. And so we began thinking about what other steps could be taken. And as Nick was explaining, this new vision of a more diverse agriculture, one that mimics the natural landscape that once existed on our landscape, one of living roots in the soil, holding the soil in place, taking up nutrients, um, taking up water and evapotranspiring that water, using it to construct the plant bodies. That if we could come up with new technologies that would effectively mimic that in a production agriculture system, that could be a way to, very, very seriously address this wicked problem. Our agricultural system, um, predominantly annual row crops, um, is finely tuned to give us high yield, commercially valuable commodities that also give us pollution. We've decided to have these crops and to have them at the prices that make the whole system turn. We're going to have to live with these environmental uh, externalities. And the system that folks at University of Minnesota Forever Green Initiative and elsewhere are developing of new crops, new technologies that can be deployed that have all these uh, environmental benefits, but also um, have benefits to producers and rural communities and um, commodity people within the supply chain and end users. So we began to see that as a vision that could actually be transformative, and we could see it working. Um, but we also realized that as a nonprofit advocacy organization, relatively small organization, we have about 27 employees. Um, we didn't have all the tools, all the expertise needed to really effectively work on that. And at about the same time, Nick and his colleagues at the university were having a similar conversation that they thought this was a compelling vision. They knew they had some of the pieces, but they didn't have all the capacity and expertise that would be needed. Um, and so we found each other and began this project, the Forever Green Partnership Project, to think about how can we join forces? How can we connect with others to deploy a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary strategy to begin this transformation to diversify agriculture? So it's been an interesting project, and I really look forward to your questions and comments as we get into this today.
Awesome. That's great. One question I have is whether the solution to this inherently involves scale, that this could be better done at a small scale than at a large scale. Do you have thoughts on that? That basically decreasing the scale of operations is something which is needed or could take place, or are we basically stuck with large scale agriculture?
You want to take that, Nick?
Sure. Um, well, um, David, that raises profound questions and illustrates why this matter of diversification is such a complex or wicked problem. My very superficial answer to your question is that it is far from clear that we have a social model as it were, for the agriculture of the Midwest. In other words, the rural communities that currently exist in places where intensive industrial agriculture is practiced in the Midwest, which is most of the Midwest, are very widely in their vitality, but many of them are having terrible problems. And so it is if it is unclear uh, how human beings will be involved in farming the agriculture of the Midwest in the next few decades. There's a huge demographic crisis among our current farmers, namely that they're really old. And there's a massive dynamic of consolidation going on. Um, there are all kinds of threats to rural communities that come as unintended consequences of consolidation and industrialization of agriculture. And so the question of how agriculture will be practiced and by whom and in what scale is very unclear. We have all kinds of folks that are coming into the United States from other places who know how to farm, who want to farm, who are interested in living in rural places. And very interesting innovations, cultural and also agricultural, are being proposed by those cultural communities that seek to live in the Midwest. And they represent a very interesting and potentially hugely important resource as we try to figure out how human beings will live in the rural Midwest and how that will relate to the ecological functionings of the rural Midwest, including but not limited to food. So that is a whole fascinating thing that we could easily have a whole webinar about because there's
Oh,
all kinds
really?
of cultural evolution involved in that.
Yeah.
Nick,
Yeah.
one thing I guess I would add to the question of scale is um, if we're going to address these environmental and social impacts of agriculture, um, we need to be thinking about the landscape scale. We need to be deploying this technology on as much of the ag landscape as we can. Now, one of the things that I don't think we've touched on yet is that the technologies that we're talking about here, these novel crops, perennial crops and winter annual crops predominantly, are are being designed to integrate into the existing agriculture system. So many of these crops can be planted with corn and soybeans as part of longer rotations at a more diverse agriculture. So it's a transformation, it's an evolution, but it's not a complete undermining or overturning. And I think that's one of the key strategies is, um, can we make it better without attacking it frontally?
Sure. So we have to get there from here. So there has to be something which is incremental, perhaps. There's so much to talk about, but I think given the fact that we're a little late, I think we should just let the group um, steer the conversation. I guess I'm going to ask one kind of prompt question and then encourage people to raise their virtual hands, and so we could turn to a conversation. But because this is such a wicked problem, could you tell us a success story, something that is actually working well in this direction? That this is possible, or is that something that you can do? I hope it is.
Hmm. Uh, yeah, Whitney, I'd like to talk a little bit about winter camelina.
Yeah, I think that's
The
a
other
that's very
WC, as
promising. Yeah,
we often
exactly.
say here. And yeah, which is an interesting case of the dynamics of trying to develop new crops. So Winter camelina is a so-called winter hardy oilseed. That means it's planted in the fall, it survives the winter, and is harvested in the late spring. And it can be grown well with other annual crops that grow in the summer. So it has a lot of potential to provide this continuous living cover business. It produces a low carbon vegetable oil that is of interest for renewable transportation fuels, including sustainable aviation fuel, so-called sustainable aviation fuel. It also produces low carbon protein that can be part of what I call the other SAF, sustainable animal feed. We very much need to decarbonize our animal agriculture. So it has an interesting value proposition in terms of how it can contribute materially to our food system and transport system, as well as its ecological benefits. There is a significant frontier of cross-sector collaboration around this idea of sustainable aviation fuel. So the world's airlines recognize their large carbon footprint and that their carbon footprint mainly comes from fuel. And there have been commitments, agreements among world airlines to cooperate to, as they increase the scale of their operations, to try to do that using sustainable aviation fuel. And there is a cross-sector, cross-scale collaborative organization here in Minnesota called the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Hub that is very intentionally a public-private NGO collaborative around scaling up sustainable aviation fuel. And this shows, David, I think, first of all, the formation of new institutions to try to address the complexity of scaling. And we find that that institution is quite conscious of the complexity of its task, is willing to play a mediating role in the normative challenges that arise as one thinks about the trade-offs of which are large between the more immediate sources of sustainable aviation fuel, which would be ethanol made from corn, and more substantial, well, and other forms that might offer a larger package of sustainability benefits to society. But the fact that this cross-sector institution has formed and that it is functioning in a way that I think is cognizant of the complexity, social, technical, political, cultural of its challenge is very encouraging to us.
That's great. That was perfect for what I was asking. So, uh, uh, questions? Who wants to chime in here? Vivek, I think you might be muted.
Could you hear me?
Now I can.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you, Clark and Nick. Ever since I heard this podcast title, I was reminded of my project which I'm working on in India, like Evergreen Revolution. So for Evergreen, and we are also working on diversification. So the definition for Evergreen Revolution is productivity in perpetuity without associated social and ecological harm, which is proposed by Professor M.S. Swaminathan. I think diversification is a universal heuristic which needs implementation at multiple scales of any system. So we are looking it in this perspective. There is a separate field called ecological intensification field. So while we are focusing on the productivity improvement through breeding path, crop genetics and breeding path, while keeping that productivity improvement on one side, and on the other side, we can ecologically intensify the pest control and pollination services and everything in parallel. So there is no any conflict between the productivity and biodiversity conservation, so that we could reduce the amount of fertilizer and pesticide usage. So we are trying this in smallholder system. We are very much eager to learn more, share ideas with you also in future. Yeah, thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Well, if I could respond briefly, we would welcome conversation, Vivek. And I want to say that we are certainly aware of the work of Professor Swaminathan, and it is no coincidence that the term evergreen is in common between your project and ours. We were well aware of the concept of so-called evergreen agriculture, as which of course is a sort of theme of agricultural development in Africa and other places, and that was part of how we decided to name our whole project Forever Green.
Awesome. Sandra.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I'm curious, when you talk about creating this new infrastructure and you've got to get all these actors involved, I'm wondering how you go about doing that, and what does it take to make that kind of collaboration happen?
Whitney, would you like to go first in this instance? And I'll back clean up.
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, it's complicated, and to be honest, that's your question is sort of at the heart of our partnership, and we're I would say this is sort of a design build operation. We're kind of figuring it out as we go along. We're what one of the key principles, though, has been to solicit the engagement, the guidance of multiple sectors and multiple disciplines, because this is very, very complicated, multi-level chessboard kind of challenge. And you need all this input to make sure you get it right. And there's history is replete with examples of sort of failed enterprises that end up leaving people demoralized and a sense that this actually can't be done and it's too hard and we need to just stick with the tried and true, which doesn't serve us well. So, to go back to the winter camelina case study that Nick mentioned, we've got a new technology, this new crop that has just been developed. We're very early on in the early commercialization stage of the actual plant plant material. But in this case, we know that because of these pledges that the airlines have made, that there's a massive, massive market demand for this. We've heard from them that if you had, millions of gallons of this, we would buy it. So that's solving, one of the key problems, is, will there be a market? If you don't have a market, farmers aren't going to plant the crop. If farmers aren't planting the crop, you're not going to have a market. And so one of our challenges has always been how to lift up both the supply side and the demand side at the same time so that they don't get out of balance. In this case, in the case of winter camelina and its potential for low carbon biofuels, we have a ready market, but we don't have the policy environment. We don't have a lot of the infrastructure that needs to be built. So we're building that from the ground up with a bunch of companies. Some of them are Minnesota-based companies. Some of them are are international companies, Bank of America, Cargill, Delta Airlines, Ecolab. Um, and so it's interesting for me as a NGO leader, not usually sitting at the table with all these big corporations, but if we want the scale and that we need, then we're going to need a lot of horsepower behind this new technology and this new industry. So um, we have in the public policy arena, we have a little coalition of organizations, which includes Delta Airlines and some of the organizations I've mentioned, some farm groups, and some environmental groups that are pushing for policy at the state level. Tax breaks for sustainable aviation fuel production with environmental sideboards to make sure this is done correctly. That's one example of a collaboration from these multi-sectors trying to influence policy at the state level.
Is,
One,
is,
yeah, go ahead.
no, please continue, and then I'll ask a follow-up question.
Another project that we have Forever Green and Friends of the Mississippi River have initiated is basically an industrial study to look at how we get the first 1 million acres of winter camelina on the landscape. Um, because we know from our commercial partners that once we've got 1 million acres, the market will sort of take over and drive this. But getting that early stage commercialization and scale up is a challenge. And so we've now just raised some money, some private money and some state and federal dollars to conduct this study, which we'll be doing over the next year or so to look at all the investments and all the pieces that need to be in place to get to that 1 million acres of winter camelina.
So is the interest of the major corporations sincere, or is it greenwashing? Um, uh, I'll just put it that
TBD,
simply.
TBD. I mean, it could be either. And one of the as a environmental nonprofit, a mission-based organization, we see our role as making sure that it's the former, not the latter. This is, this whole drive by the airline industry to get to carbon neutrality by mid-century is driven by, social demand, right? People want to be able to fly, but they don't want to be contributing to, the climate crisis by doing it. And so their customers are telling them, we want you to do this. And so they've made these commitments so that they can continue to have the social license to do what what their business, how their business makes money. Um, and our job is to hold them to that. And as Nick said, there are pathways, sustainable aviation fuel pathways that would not be sustainable, that could be very, very damaging. For instance, if we relied predominantly on corn-based ethanol, sustainable, so-called sustainable aviation fuel. So it's a bit of a dance trying to hold them to the values that they espouse. It's a good question.
Yeah, yeah. More, please.
So I want to follow up on David's question, because it just seems to me that the corporations, if there's a market, the corporations will be serious about it. Although a couple of the folks you named are not necessarily the most quote unquote responsible players. I won't name names. But so yeah, so I'm not sure what the question is, but it just seems like this is, how do you know that they're in it for the right reasons? And how do you operate now in the context of the sort of bigger political context in which anything ecological or ethical or responsible is sort of being gotten rid of, equity-based is being gotten rid of. I mean, I just want to know how you're navigating that, and can it persist? despite all of this going on at the federal level, let's say.
I'd love to respond a bit to that, Sandra. First of all, I think that the kinds of corporations that we are engaging with um, are uh, have a very difficult problem themselves in balancing the short-term and longer-term interests of those firms. And therefore, the actors that we encounter in those firms are a mix of folks that feel incentivized to deal with the here and now, and those that are incentivized to deal with what will be facing the firm 10 years down the road. And so um, it's I don't think it's all that helpful to think of these firms as monolithic. They're heterogeneous, sort of communities. And um, what I think is necessary is, first of all, to try to increasingly offer them incentives to cooperate. And so, in the context of Minnesota, we were trying to link this whole sustainable aviation fuel project to a project of trying to reduce the very pervasive and systemic contamination of drinking water in much of southeast Minnesota that is largely due to agriculture. And the scaling up of crops like this winter camelina crop that we're speaking of could very helpfully address that problem. And so we are trying to develop an efficient cooperative network to link the aviation fuel project and the clean up the drinking water project. And this is offering these companies an opportunity to be part of something that could have large reputational benefits, and but could also provide them ways of addressing their own sustainable sourcing pledges, which they have made publicly. And between you and me, don't have a really clear idea of how they make good on those pledges. So um, we are trying to organize cooperation at sort of ever larger scales, and we're also trying to be very upfront about the need to resource, the key capacities for dealing with complex problems, which are all about learning and reflexivity, being self-aware of your limiting assumptions, et cetera, and the ability to do experiments at small scales and learn from those. These are all sort of conscious cultural evolution principles as well. And one of the things that we try to really consistently voice is the need to be aware of the importance of those and resource them.
Yeah, great. Tanuja, and I'm eager to ask a question. Keep going.
It seems to me in every field that the leading edge work is being taken up by NGOs who don't have the funds, and often the participants give up their own lives or their own potential for income to do this work. And while the people who do have all the funds, the organizations and corporations, are sitting on the sidelines waiting for the risks to be lowered. Could you propose a different economic model where this is not the case? Surely the big players should be part of this somehow.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and something we've thought about. One of the strengths of this approach is that it harnesses the market. So in this case, we're using what can sometimes be the destructive impact of markets and capitalist systems to our advantage to try to drive this transformation. That's one of the reasons we are excited about it, not because those inherent the values inherent in that, but because we see it as a more enduring strategy to get these new systems deployed on the ground, and get these environmental gains. So there are some tensions there that you're raising. And if we had a magic wand and we could do it in a more cooperative way, we would like to do that. And we haven't had time to talk about some of the social justice elements of this vision and the tensions that exist there, but we think about that a lot.
Yeah, so I have uh, one question I had is that if you look at the existing agricultural system in the Midwest, that itself, I think, was a conscious cultural change effort decades ago when there was a different set of objectives. And so I wondered if there's anything to learn from how the currently entrenched system came about through universities and cooperative extension services and breeding programs. And I mean, that was, even though the outcome has proven to be uh, uh, destructive, is there something to learn from that effort so that actually knowing what we know now and with a different set of objectives, we could actually imitate the success of what, after all, was a very impressive case of large-scale multi-level cultural evolution?
Nick, I think that's you. And you're muted.
Thanks, Whit. Um, Certainly, uh, institutions like universities are uniquely poised to be um, agents of innovation in the way that you're speaking of, David, I think.
And you being at a university, so you are that agent in many respects.
Yeah, but the capacity of the ability of university faculty to form collective efforts to innovate in terms of systems of innovation and cultural evolution is large, and I think unique, among our sort of fundamental societal sectors. That's not to say that universities can do actually carry out that innovation and evolution by themselves, of course. It's rather to say that I think there is an ability and arguably a responsibility to consider actually playing those unique roles. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and another question I have is that at some point, if we're trying to evolve complex systems, then there needs to be a degree of modeling of complex systems and what's often called strategic mapping or participatory modeling, or where you actually build an explicit systems model and then you use that in order to change the system. And so a question I have is, to what extent has that been brought to bear? To what extent do you regard it as important that if we're really going to evolve complex systems, we have to be really good technologically and modeling those systems, digital twins, this kind of simulation modeling that goes along with real world experiments, a kind of a high tech systems modeling approach. Has that been something that's needed and has it been applied?
Whitney, do you want to speak to that, or shall I take a shot at it first?
You go ahead.
Okay. So, attaining strategic perspective and holistic or systemic perspective on what we're trying to do has been a challenge, David. And we are trying to develop what we see as what we sometimes call a strategic infrastructure in Forever Green so that we can be more strategically and systemically aware of what we're up to. Um, Concepts like strategy mapping seem very valuable to us, and we are trying to gear up to do that sort of work. It is we have not dipped our toes into actual simulation modeling um, of the digital twin sort of variety, but we the ability to have holistic and systemic awareness of the complexity of what we're dealing with is obviously critical. It's challenging to attain that, and it's challenging to attain that in institutions. We all work in this cross sector thing. We're all embedded in institutions that are not used to cooperating, are not used to addressing grand challenges in a systemically serious way. And so a lot of institutional innovation has been achieved, I think, by Forever Green, but quite a bit more is necessary also.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, okay. Uh, I got one more, and then I don't even want to be the only one asking questions. But one level of this wicked problem is that when you try to implement this kind of thing at the level of farming communities, interesting single farmers, for example, and doing something quite new, then you run across other problems with cultural evolution of them just doing things which don't fit in with their neighbors and things like that. So how do you at that? And you alluded to that, Nick, at the beginning of this talk that when we're dealing with farming communities and you're really trying to get new practices adopting, how do you deal with the kind of community life and that kind of thing?
Well, Whit, again, why don't you let me say something
Yeah.
first?
Yeah.
There is a crucial need for collective learning by farmers in place about how to develop diversified, continuous living cover, regenerative, etc. Farming. And there is plenty of interest by farmers in doing that collectively. So we have been collaborating. A fundamental of what we do is to develop what we call place-based pilot projects
Awesome.
for diversified systems on the premise that these diversified systems are place specific and they have to deliver locally relevant value. They have to be supported by a cross-sector support base in situ in their particular place,
Yeah.
and um, and farmers fundamentally are the innovators and engineers and bio designers of these diversified systems, and they have to do that collectively as opposed to individually because there are the cultural sort of constraints that you mentioned. But we don't have trouble finding farmer groups that are extremely interested in diversification while also being extremely pressured by the precarity of farming. However, it's really important to note that farming based on undiversified systems is an absolute economic disaster in the last few years, and this year in particular. And so, let's not, underestimate the peril of continuing on the current path of increasingly undiversified systems. And I do want to be clear that the trend in the Midwest has been towards loss of diversification rather than increases in diversification and continuous living cover.
Yeah. Well, first of all, welcome to Lillian. You just checked in from Kenya. And yes, this will be recorded, so welcome. And I think we're just wrapping up here, but when it comes time to that scale, I wanted to mention another person based in Minneapolis, Bill Barberg, with whom I did a podcast titled "How to Evolve Complex Systems." And at that scale, although he has not done it in an agricultural context, there are methods, and it's back to strategic mapping and the like and so on, where you could really function well at that place-based scale. So I think that excites me a lot because I do think that there's the one of the greatest zones for flexibility is at that level, and the tools that we're developing can successfully be employed. So I'll have Beth and Juliet send a link to that podcast, which is just freshly actually two relevant podcasts. The second one is with Will Ruddock in Kenya, Lillian, and grassroots economics. So I'm pleased to provide that to the audience here as a contribution here. So Tanuja, I think you get the last word.
Um, my question is related to incentives. Earlier on, you mentioned incentivized cooperation. So I wondered how you approach it. Typically, in the capitalist world, cooperation, collaboration is about what do I get from this and what do you get from this? So it's not about a shared goal. It's not about a shared commons. It's about dividing the pie. So I wonder how you do that. And this is very much along the lines of what ProSocial World tries to achieve.
Well, my reaction is to take your point, and so we do have players in the private sector that are aware, it seems to me, of the existential threats that to their businesses, but more broadly to humanity that we are facing. And there's also, I wanted to mention this before, a very large pool of capital that, is, ostensibly interested in climate solutions, ostensibly interested in long time horizons, so-called patient capital, et cetera. And that does appear to be something that can help these actors in our dominant firms who are concerned with the long run, big picture, et cetera, to get some agency and traction within their firms. So that capital is an important factor in all of this. Very much TBD, but we are trying to connect with the networks of investors that say they're trying to support sustainability transitions in agriculture and to scale regenerative agriculture, et cetera. They certainly have capital, and again, their intentions and actions are TBD, but they matter, I think.
Yeah, that's good to know, basically, that it doesn't have to be starved for financial capital, not to speak of multiple forms of other forms of capital.
Thanks for all the great resources that are accumulating in the chat, which I'm assiduously copying. Much
Yeah, the one by
appreciated.
Bill and Nick, I'm so happy that you've already checked Bill Barberg out. That's awesome. And then Will Ruddock, who's based in Kenya and has a grassroots economics foundation. Amazing. And so I would just encourage everyone here on this call, check out both of those podcasts. You'll get it. And I think that this is one of the services that we're trying to do, of course, is to just be a catalyst for this kind of
Mhm.
thing. And there's one of your forms of capital, basically, is just basically this kind of communication and connection and all of that. So I think this has been a catalytic moment. and that's what we do, and what you guys have been doing so very well. And so let's have more of it.
Thanks a lot, David and Beth and the other pro-socialites for convening us. And I've gotten a lot out of this conversation and a lot out of our relationship with ProSocial over the years. So, and thank you all for the various suggestions and comments again that you've made in chat. I'm excited to read and learn.
Good, great. Okay, onward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Great conversation.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Yes, indeed.